Shivering Death, a new adventure from the Dragon Delves anthology book, published for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. This adventure is written for 11th level characters, and, if you can imagine, involves a very cold place, and thus a white dragon, as you can see by this image here. It has artwork by Ed Kwong, who has a very unique art style, and was written by Damon Cook. This adventure should take roughly 2 to 3 sessions to play if your sessions are around 3 to 4 hours. I recently ran this session after connecting it to my Undermountain campaign as the source of some cold related creatures and part of the dungeon level. Now, of course, you can run it with its original beginning as it has its own sort of intro as you go through the adventure. Here's some of the creatures involved in the adventure. Obviously, an adult white dragon known as Shivering Death, also known as Chaladax. There are winter wolves. There are some wyverns, a mammoth, a rhinoceros, a troll, a shield guardian, which is not an enemy; it's more of a treasure the player characters can find. Several young remorhezes, and ice mephits, ghosts, frost giant, and technically a priest. You have the different names for the different frost giants who are found in this adventure, which is something I do like about this, than the various different creatures, as they each have their own name instead of just being, say, random frost giant number 5. Maybe a little bit of background on why they're there. There is this intro in order to get the player characters to this location if they're just in a generic town. I find this odd that it suggests that this location, this cave, which has a bunch of frost giants in it, and trolls and winter wolves, and an adult white dragon, is only 2 days away from whatever town the player characters are in, which is very odd. Now, note this adventure will be fit really nicely in Rime of the Frostmaiden, probably maybe as a ladder adventure in that campaign, or maybe as a follow-up adventure for a Rime of the Frostmaiden campaign, because it could easily fit in, well, Icewind Dale. You could also fit it anywhere in the far north of Faerun, along the spine of the World Mountains, or real northern regions in general, if not southern regions. Now, again, this tells you how far away it is, and it's not far from civilization, which again seems odd considering the kind of creatures that are in the adventure. This is the DM's map. The adventure is supposed to begin with the player characters arriving through the entrance right here, and then they can start picking directions as to where they want to go. There's a number of frozen statues. These are actually corpses of different creatures, like this one I believe is a Remorhas. This one over here is the Shield Guardian, which is still active. The control amulet is not with it, though. There's even a statue of a frost giant over here. It's a petrified frost giant. And there's some hidden areas, like right here and also right here. When I connected my adventure to Rime of the to Undermountain, I just added a hole above the ceiling here and said there was a portal there, and the player characters found this area and later found the shield guardian amulet by sheer chance of having a detect magic going when they went back in there. But there's frost giants scattered throughout the adventure. Here's a layer of the dragon itself. You assume the water comes from off the map and is not an accessible location, unless the DM wants to push forward that direction or downriver, perhaps doing a undermountain, well, not undermountain, but an underground or underdark type campaign. There's also this fire ring, which is sort of a magical fire created or related to a group of ghosts, which are people who have died in this adventure prior to the player characters. Now, going into the actual adventure, let me get rid of this ad here. You do get some basic information considering the ceiling heights and all that, the extreme cold environment. This means that it is either in the very far north or extreme high altitudes. Again, you can place this where you want. It doesn't fit it's not set for any specific campaign setting. And you get some decent descriptive text as you're going through the adventure. There are a lot of encounters, hostile encounters in this adventure, including beginning with 4 wyverns, which are quite dangerous, which this might be a problematic intro for the adventure that the DM should be aware of. if you're running the beginning and the player characters are starting with the wyvern fight right here, they're going to have a problem, or you as a DM will have a problem, as the player characters are not going to have a lot of space to fight the wyverns. It's really too small of a space. I would recommend creating a map that is shaped like the entrance there, and just a large, frosty, rocky area that the player characters can use for that battle. And then there would be an entrance for the player characters to enter the caves afterwards. I didn't need to do that with my adventure, as I started it in this cave instead in a different way. And the player characters sort of finished right here. It was sort of a backwards version of this dungeon crawl. Now, there is more of this art from Ed Kwan again. It's different stylistically from what D&D art often is. It's much cleaner and smoother, I'll say that. There's some different information on the different creatures you encounter, again, the names of the giants and all that, and some of their backstory. If your player characters are more role playing oriented, this stuff might come in handy or might be used more. If your group is more like my group, they'll probably just kill all these giants for the experience of it, or just because they like battling, and they may not get into this information. My group did not. They briefly talked with one of the giants before one of the players started destroying that giant. And here's other giants talking with the giants, information you can get from the giants. The initial quest to come here does involve finding sort of a ritual to help end some unusual weather. You don't really need to use this if you don't want to. You can. I didn't use that plot because I didn't feel like it was necessary, considering the group I was playing with that was used to dungeon crawling. But if you want to use more of a role playing storyline with this, where the player characters have to talk to the giants, it's not a bad idea to use it. Asking the giants this and that and all that, and getting the information they have rather than just slaughtering them or just killing everything in sight. There's some foggy areas in here, which for rolling on roll 20, that might be a little tricky to do for just that one area at least. Random treasures scattered about. Here's an ice cave with, in this case, one of the giants. I think this is actually the petrified giant, who is supposed to have a wand of wonder. I think I just gave it to a random other giant and my players found it. The Wand of Wonder is used in an interesting way in this adventure, where it's the reason why there's a rhinoceros found in one of the caves that's somehow alive and just dealing with the cold. Maybe it's a woolly rhinoceros, though. And it's also the reason why the dragon has an awful lot of gems worth a single gold each. So I like that they included some of the effects from the Wand of Wonder. You can find it, online, either the 2014 version, or if you want to run this in 2014, or the 2025 version. If you're running this adventure in 2014 and you're wondering whether it's going to take a lot of conversion, the answer is no. Basically, all the creatures in here are all going to be found in 2014. They might be slightly different in the way they're built, but for the most part, every one of these creatures is a standard creature. You're not going to have any trouble there, and it will run perfectly fine. I ran mine in 2025, and same thing, ran fine, no issues for the most part. Well, I won't say that. There are some, in my opinion, a few odd issues with this adventure. Here's the ice method in a little concealed cave. I like that they made the concealed cave only detectable if you get in close proximity. So your character with a ridiculous perception doesn't notice it unless they happen to have moved past that area, which sort of happened in my game. More frost giants, obviously. Here's the winter wolves and then the troll. I ran it a little bit differently, where the troll and the ice methods were found in Undermountain by the entrance, but again, that's how I ran this adventure. And just different rooms. Here's the statue, I guess, of the frost giant woman with the wand of wonder and all that. You don't necessarily have to fight her. She begins, I believe, petrified, but you could run it slightly differently, of course. I think the original concept is she needs to be unpetrified, but again, run it as you wish. This is also the treasure pile of the dragon in the very end. You'll note an awful lot of copper pieces here. Tremendous amount, in fact. It begs the question why so many copper pieces are minted to begin with. Player characters usually find this to be absolutely worthless. DMs find it to be amusing, especially all these coppers and silver pieces as treasure. This is basically junk treasure for the most part. The gems are sort of junkish treasure. There's a couple other items that are interesting. A bead of force, the Wonder Wonder itself, which some players will love, others will think is a junk item that they need to sell. But the big item in this adventure is really to get a Shield Guardian, which is a extremely powerful, little defender that travels around with the player characters and all that. There is a reward if the player characters went on the quests that could be given to them in the original adventure and stop the weird weather from taking place. Again, it didn't feel like to me I needed to use it in my particular campaign, but if you want to run it from according to the book, you could do that. Now, again, I have a little bit of issue with parts of this adventure. One, that it's so close in location to whatever settlement the player characters begin in, because a lot of these hostile creatures should be going out hunting and raiding in the area, and it's shocking that anything would be anywhere close to it. I mean, I wouldn't imagine there would be any towns within 20, 30 miles of a bunch of frost giants and a white dragon and a bunch of winter wolves and wyverns. I mean, you got to think about how many these creatures are often a lot of prey animals and they will be hunting. And I mean, the frost giants, you could say, will eat anything, but they all live there in these tight confines, and they're going to have to get food somewhere. And a town full of humans is one of those possible places, especially if the humans have animals. This is sort of an overthought by the writers of this adventure. My other issue with this adventure is the tunnels throughout the adventure are incredibly small when you think about it. It looks fine for player characters because they're about 10 to 15 feet wide, but giants are 15 feet wide. And this is an issue with some older adventures as well, such as the Frost Giant Rift, which is very similar in a lot of ways to this adventure. These giants, you could even argue it would be difficult terrain for them to squeeze through these tunnels, a lot of these tunnels, making it very difficult for them to move around, and even in some ways for the dragon to move around, other than the fact that the dragon has burrow speed. It's incredibly difficult for huge creatures to maneuver in environments like this to begin with, even if the tunnels were 15 feet wide all around. This is a flaw in adventure design that I'm guessing that either Damon Cook didn't just overlooked from lack of experience or did intentionally, which I doubt it's the latter, because anyone who's run a big giant cave before has probably had this issue before where giants get stuck in certain areas. My player characters battled most of them right here. If you're running it where they came in from the entrance, they're probably getting get stuck in one of these tunnels, probably over here, and they're going to have the same problem. They're going to get bunched up, even if it's 2025 and they can move through enemy spaces. They're going to get bunched up way too easily, and it's going to lead to the player characters, especially if they're heavily range built, to be able to just pick them off, and they're likely never going to get into melee. They might use their range attacks, which they have in both versions of 5e, but they'll be at a huge disadvantage in their own layer, which seems like poor adventure design, in my opinion, or just a lack of experience for the writer. Now, this could easily be overcome with larger tunnels or at least wider tunnels, but you could argue that, well, that would necessitate a much larger map and a smaller area. But another option might be maybe there's a magical field in place that allows creatures related to cold specifically to be able to misty step within the cave so many times per day, like equal to their a certain modifier or something like that. This would make a very interesting twist. I'll note as well there's a dim light throughout the caves, which the adventure says was reflecting off the crystalline snowy walls full of ice. This doesn't make sense when it comes to physics. One of my players pointed this out because guess what? He plays a Gloomstalker, but the adventure states it goes all throughout the caves, which wouldn't happen in reality because that wouldn't make sense. So you could argue that it's a magical field doing it. So why couldn't the magic field do other things that, say, would make the giants in their own home able to maneuver a little better, for example? This would fix a lot of those problems. In fact, if you run this and you want them to be able to maneuver a bit better, I would do that if I ever ran it again, for example. And it would also open the door for characters that are maybe somehow cold character related to do the same thing or to take advantage of that. You'd have to come up with some rules for it. Again, this is my idea for fixing this adventure, but run it as you will in the long run. Now, overall, this adventure has some flaws. It is very similar to the Frost Giant Rift, and it has some of the same problems as the Frost Giant Rift. I haven't reviewed that adventure, but I will in time, and you'll note it has the same problem of tunnels that are too narrow for the creatures in it, and it's just packed full of predatory creatures that where are they getting their food from? It's just a problem. I will note the ghosts are detected here. I think I mentioned it earlier, and they're adventurers or barbarians that were killed by the giants earlier, and their ghosts linger here. It's one of the more interesting locations in this place, the more original locations, but there's not a lot of original stuff in this adventure overall. They did use the Wand of Wonder in a sort of clever way, which I give them credit there, but that's kind of the high points of this adventure. Now, overall, I'd rate it a 2.75 out of 5. It's not bad, but it's not that good overall. It'd be a good adventure if your player characters love a lot of combat, particularly if you're running Icewind Dale or Rime of the Frostmaiden or something similar to that. My group seemed to like it because, again, they love lots of combat, they love lots of battles. They happen to be around 11th or 12th level. It fit really nicely connecting it to Undermountain. And if you have a group that level and they love combat, it's going to work for them. If they're not big fans of combat, this is not an adventure that you're going to want to run for them. They're going to get bored. They're going to think it's a slog. That's just from my experience. That's how I'd look at it. Now, overall, guys, that's what I'd rate it. If you like these videos and you'd like to see more of them, please like this video for the algorithm and subscribe for more content.